Hi everyone, Dennis here from Pixel Shade, and today we are gonna have a look at this little machine, the SEGA Game Gear. I can't guarantee that I will be 100% objective when it comes to this device, because it's been such an essential part of my childhood and I have a lot of nostalgia towards the device. However, I really wanted to tackle the misconception that this device is a portable master system, a misconception that I had myself during my childhood. And now when I'm older and I know better, I thought that I would like to share that with you guys. So tag along as we are exploring the fantastic and unique features of the SEGA Game Gear. Okay, so some background story why this device was so important for me during my childhood. So for those of you who don't know, I'm half Swedish, half Hungarian, and me and my family, we usually drove to Hungary either once or twice a year to visit my relatives. And for a child of 9 years old, that was a gruesome trip. 24 hours on bumpy Eastern European concrete roads. It was no fun. During that time, I haven't really found the interest in reading. I know my brother, he read a lot during those trips, and it felt like he was pretty okay with them, because that's what he did when he was home. He read a lot. I, on the other hand, loved games. I had a Commodore 64 during my childhood, and eventually I upgraded, I think it was in 1989, I upgraded to an Amiga 500, and that became my primary platform. So really, when the Game Gear came out, it felt like such an uncompromised experience. It felt like I could basically almost take like Amiga, similar games as the Amiga on the go. That's what it felt like as a child. I remember I had a couple of friends who had the Master System, so it did feel like a portable Master System. I even had the Master Gear, which you could connect Master System games to this device. And I also lended Wonder Boy in Monsterland from a friend of mine, and it was great. It was one of my favorite games for the Amiga, and I could play it on this device, and it even felt better than the Amiga version. And then eventually Wonder Boy The Dragon's Trap came out, the game that you see here, and this became my favorite game on the device. But yeah, this was such a revelation because it was an uncompromised experience. And in comparison to the Game Boy, which admittedly had much better battery life, it had like 4 batteries that could last 30 hours. This one devoured 6 batteries in like 3 to 5 hours. So I think I ran the device on batteries once and never again. But it wasn't really that much trouble because I had a wall adapter, which I can connect it to, and I also had a car adapter, and that was my use case for the device. I really just wanted to have a video game console which I could bring, either play at home or play in Hungary or play on the road, which I could with this device, and it was great. I remember the first year when I had it, it felt like the trip was like just 1/4 of the distance as it usually was, because I lost track of time playing so many good games for it. But yeah, so that's a little background story of why I regard this as highly. But I think the next step we're going to do is to have a little bit of a look at the specs of the device. And before digging into the Game Gear specification, we need to look at the platform itself that it's based on, the Master System. So really, the processor of the Master System is a very typical low-powered 8-bit processor, the C-Log Z80, clocked at 3.58 MHz. You could find this in the ZX Spectrum or the Game Boy, for example. But really, where the Master System shines is really the video display processor, the VDP. And this allowed for a resolution of 256 times 192 pixels. This is a bit lower than the Nintendo Entertainment System, like a widescreen version of it. But where the Master System shine And I really do recommend watching the 8-bit guy's video on how 8-bit graphics work, because it's really essential to understand that how limited 8-bit graphics usually were. So when looking at the Master System, it had 64 colors. It had 32 colors on screen at once, theoretically. 16 colors of those were dedicated to the sprite layers and 16 colors for the tile layer. And in normal 8-bit machines, you had the limitation of only being able to use 2 colors per tile, or 2 colors per sprite, or 3 colors per sprite. And you need to layer sprites to get even more colors. But this is really where the Master System shines, because if you're making a sprite, you can use all of the 16 colors. There's no limitation. Or all of the 16 colors on any tile. Because you had 4-bit per pixels. And this made the device look a lot more like 16-bit machines. So this is an example of Mortal Kombat 2. These are the 8-bit sprites, and here are the 16-bit sprites. So as you can see, there is a difference, but I would argue that most of the difference really comes down to how these assets were mastered. But they look very similar, I would say. And other than that, you were also not limited to only using 8x8 pixel sprites. You could also use 16x16 pixel sprites, which is great. You can make bigger sprites on the Master System than on other 8-bit systems. But then it had the same limitations as the Nintendo Entertainment System, that you can only have a set amount of sprites per scan line, otherwise they would start to flicker. So for the Master System, it was 5 sprites per scan line. And then it had hardware, horizontal and vertical scrolling. And I don't remember if the Nintendo Entertainment System had that built in. I don't believe it had. I think they needed to build that into the cartridge itself. But yeah, so what's the difference when it comes to the Game Gear? Well, it's pretty much the same specs. It's not a lot of difference. The big difference you can see is the resolution. It's quite a bit lower. So if we look at the Master System, you have this massive viewport to work with. But when it comes to the Game Gear, it's just like a small piece of that viewport. But what happened when you had this viewport on the Game Gear was that it was still able to make graphics the same resolution as the Master System, and then it could move its own window within that frame. And this also allowed for diagonal scrolling, something that the Master System lacked and needed to be dealt with software. So that was one of the big differences. And the next really big difference, and this is really where everything comes together. The Game Gear had a compatibility mode to be able to play Master System games, but it had special hardware on its cartridge to allow for 4096 colors. So if we look at Mortal Kombat again, and we'll look here at the arcade sprite, which is massive, by the way. So let's get rid of Raiden. And instead, I made a version of the arcade sprite for the Game Gear. And it looks like this. And this is really where you can see how important those 4096 colors were, because you had a lot of more options when it came to making color choices. Still, the 16 colors on the sprite layer and being able to use that per sprite was essential to make it look like a 16-bit machine, or something close to a 16-bit machine. So if we kind of scale down the arcade sprite, I don't think that we lose that much fidelity on the Game Gear, and it's really just thanks to the increase in colors. One thing that, the 16-bit machines had, which the 8-bit struggled with, was layers and just having amazing parallax scrolling effects. But sure, the Master System, the Game Gear, even the Nintendo Entertainment System could fake this through bank swapping, where they basically had a tile set and they just swapped memory banks. And when they swapped memory bank, they could basically have different version of the tile set where they make a tile move once it's swapping across multiple tile sets. So that was one way they did to fake parallax scrolling effects on the 8-bit machines, and it was actually kind of cool, I think, back in the days. But one thing that the Master System platform had, which also included the Game Gear, was that you could sort your tiles above the sprites. And the way that they did this was that you could choose a background color, and once you chose the background color, the tile would automatically be sorted above the sprites. And well, here you can actually see, I mean, in both these examples, you can see that it's basically just a tile covering the sprite. But when it comes to more advanced games like Royal Stone, you could actually see it here, how the sprite goes through the jail bars here. And this really looks 16-bit in my opinion. And I think it's an extra feature which both the Game Gear and the Master System had in its arsenal to kind of come closer to that 16-bit era. And I showcased a couple of games for my brother, like Royal Stone right here, as well as Sylvan Tale, and he was kind of confused because he told me, like, was the Game Gear really 8-bit? Wasn't it a 16-bit machine? He couldn't really grasp it, because if you look at Royal Stone, many Super Nintendo games like RPGs look worse than the Game Gear game. So really the potential of the VDP, the amount of colors, and the flexibility of how you could use colors was essential to create these really nice games. What really held the Master System back was that the base palette was only 64 colors, so it was only double the colors to choose from than the total amount of colors it could use. And this usually ended up with games looking kind of garish, with a lot of like neon colors, really bright colors. On the other hand, the Game Gear could do more subtle colors, more 16-bit like colors. I mean, the Game Gear even had more colors than the Mega Drive. The Mega Drive only had 512. So yeah, in the end, what I'm coming to with this whole video is that I think we need to step away with the idea that the Game Gear is a portable Master System. It was a continuation of the Master System with a compatibility mode. However, like always, it made most financial sense for developers to develop games for both the Master System and the Game Gear using the compatibility mode. And I think this was the biggest flaw, because that's basically why you wouldn't see the Game Gear games shine like it did in the later part of its lifespan, really. So, this is my take on the Game Gear and what makes it special. Sure, it's still a portable Master System in a sense, I agree. But I think we kind of need to move away that it's only that, because actually Sega worked on perfecting the Master System platform, and that accumulated to the Game Gear. And from the late releases, I can really see where they were going. They were kind of bridging that gap between 8-bit hardware and 16-bit hardware with the Game Gear. And you could really see that in the later games. One thing that I've done is that I've actually redrew some of the graphics from Sonic 1 to make it look more like a 16-bit game. But I'll probably make just a short video about that in the future, because I've been dragging on too long with this video right now. This is a new format for me. I'm not used to doing live presentations like this. There's not a lot of editing involved, and I do this because I really don't have time to do really ambitious videos for YouTube. But I still hope you find this interesting, so let me know what you think, and if you have any memories of the Game Gear, or if you would like to try it out yourself. This one right here is not a official Game Gear. I sold mine back in the days, I regret it. This is actually a new case from Retro6 UK, and I have a replacement motherboard with a Raspberry Pi inside called the SEGA Game Gear. So if you're interested, I'm just leaving the links below. There's no affiliate, they're not sponsoring me or anything. But if you're interested in kind of like reliving this experience in today in a very comfortable way, that's one way to do it. So yeah, Take care, guys, and I'll talk to you soon. So, okay, bye.